Well, greetings to you. I want to just talk a little bit today about NATO, a little bit about its history, a little bit where it's come from, a little bit, sadly, where it's going to. Now, way back in the 1960s, when I was a trooper in the yeomanry with a light armoured reconnaissance unit, which was part, I think, then of 4th Armoured Division. It was part of the NATO infrastructure. And of course, as we know, post-war, NATO was basically the bulwark we had against what were then the Warsaw Pact countries, which were led by the USSR. And it was a very militaristic society, a very evil society, really. And the people running it were not very nice. And after the war, of course, we know that Joe Stalin ran it, and then it had a litany of other unsavoury characters from the KGB and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't very nice, and I was very keen member of NATO Armed Forces, young man though I was, and I felt that it had good work to do, and it would keep the Russians out of Western Europe, and it was very successful in that. It was perceived to be very successful in that, let's put it that way, because we're never really quite sure that there was any intention of the Warsaw Pact countries to travel any further west than the buffer countries that they occupied at the time. And of course, we know that the Soviet Union made very, very big enemies in some of the smaller countries, the Baltic states and so on and so forth, with their very, very unpleasant regimes. And to this day, Estonians and Latvians, so on and so forth, hate the Russians, and with good reason. We also know, do we not, that the conflict between the Poles and the Russians goes back well over 100 years. They don't like each other either. And the long and short of it, in Europe, nobody likes anybody else, which is why the European Union's in a bit of a pickle, because everybody hates everybody else. And it has been so in Europe now for probably 1,000 years. Never mind. Let's just fast forward to where we are now. When the Warsaw Pact countries collapsed, or started to collapse in the late 1980s, it was quite obvious that NATO had become an anachronism. So there wasn't really any need for it, and certainly not any need for any expansion. And of course, the agreement with NATO, American-led NATO, one might argue these days simply a puppet of the United States, the neocons in Washington. This was a situation where, frankly, there wasn't much point, but of course, with a military-industrial complex the size of the United States, round about $1 trillion a year, that's an extremely big budget. And of course, there's a very big CIA budget, and there's a lot of it's unaudited, and we don't quite know where it is. But you have to have a bogeyman. If you're going to spend all this money on arms and equipment and intelligence and so on and so forth, you have to have a bogeyman. So although the Soviet Union collapsed, the Warsaw Pact countries collapsed, there had to be somebody that we had to be frightened of, and the propaganda ran it very well, that the Russian Federation, the new Russian Federation, which once they got rid of their crooked oligarchs, so on and so forth, were beginning to draw closer to Europe in order that they could trade and supplies with energy and commodities and rare earths in exchange for BMWs and Volkswagen and so on and so forth, that wanted to trade with Europe. This was something that the United States really didn't want, because they didn't want Russia to be drawn in to Western Europe in what should have been a peace dividend, a massive peace dividend. It was better that they were kept out, and the Americans did their very best to do that, which is why they didn't. They're now saying, oh, the Europeans have got to pay for their own defence, they've got to do this, they've got to contribute more to NATO. But I can tell you I was part of that, both as an ordinary trooper and an officer of field rank eventually. But I can tell you the Americans knew that they had to maintain control over the whole system and the whole geopolitical military system by sponsoring it and being the biggest player on the park. And this is what they did. So they were quite happy to fund it, as long as they were able to control it. Now, what we've seen latterly, and I've mentioned this before, they were trying to get regime change in the Russian Federation. I've covered this before. This is about BlackRock. It's about Vanguard. It's about destabilizing what is now the Russian Federation so that they can have access to their commodities, rare earth, and so on and so forth, and agricultural, and the whole mass of the Russian Federation's goodies, as it were. Now, notwithstanding the fact that NATO promised not to expand, the Americans promised not to expand NATO, they did, and you've only got to look at a map of that to see how much they extended NATO through the Baltic states, into Central and Eastern Europe, and Poland and Romania, so on and so forth. All were drawn into the NATO net, and the Russian Federation saw this as a threat, as indeed they would, wouldn't they, as they see NATO creeping further and further towards the actual real Russian border. And the final game that the neocons in Washington played was to destabilize the Russian Federation by a war in Ukraine, leading to a regime change. And that was the object with a proxy war of the Ukraine. And they prodded the bear, and they prodded the bear, and they prodded the bear. They destabilized the 2014 elections in the Ukraine. And they took that and they forward with somebody who was going to play an anti-Russian game. And it ended up in 2017 with Zelensky, rather unlikely character. And the war has progressed. And I suggested 3 or 4 years ago that sooner or later the Russians would crush the Ukraine. And we would be, or NATO certainly, would be very much further behind than where it started. You would actually have a more powerful Russia. The economic sanctions, which always fail on most countries, it makes countries very often their economy is stronger. And of course, the Russian Federation has become much stronger militarily. I got my timings quite wrong. I thought the collapse of Ukraine was going to come 18 months ago. I got that wrong. Timings are everything, of course. It's always clever to be right, but you've got to also know when you're going to be right. So it's pretty well looking that I was going to be right, but at the wrong time. Leaving that aside. So we're going to eventually be left, I would suggest, with a rump state, Western Ukraine, which will have to be one which is not hostile to the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation doesn't want control over the Western Ukraine. Basically, it's a corrupt shithole, and they want nothing to do with it. And incidentally, I'm not a Putin stooge. I'm a geopolitical military analyst. It's what I do. It's what I'm trained in. So I'm not pro-Zelensky or anti-Zelensky or pro-Russian or anti-Russian or pro-Putin, or I'm not a Putin stooge. I'm trying to tell people how it is, what is really happening. And of course, those of you who want to look at my website, you'll see my interviews with people like Colonel McGregor, so on and so forth, people who also have access to the inside information, which these days, of course, I don't have. Notwithstanding any of that, we are where we are. This whole sorry, ghastly war could have ended in 2022, April 2022, when a peace agreement was signed in Turkey, and it had everybody's signature on it. And it wasn't ratified. It was going to be ratified. Boris Johnson, as I've said before, flew to Kiev to actually get it torn up. It was torn up, and that was probably round about in the region of 900,000 Ukrainian young men dead since then, and probably about 100,000 young Russian soldiers dead. All to no avail. All to no avail. The war is lost as far as the Ukraine and the proxy was concerned. Trump is backpedaling like mad, pretending it's got nothing to do with him. And of course, he's looking to, or we're getting a lot of brave talk from the Europeans, but they're straw men. The British Army has never been smaller. The Royal Navy, the Air Force are very small, under-equipped. It's the same with France. It's the same with other belligerent NATO powers. And of course, then you've got the Lilliputians like Estonia, Latvia, and so on and so forth. Those are Baltic countries who have no army or air force or whether you're speaking of. So we are a paper tiger, if you will. We are paper tiger. We couldn't probably in this country put more than a whole fully equipped, supported, holistic division in the field. The French would be the same. The Germans will probably be the same, maybe a tiny bit more, so on and so forth. So there's nothing we can do. We're counting our divisions in 3s and 4s and 5s. The Russians are counting them in hundreds. So the concept of NATO having a war, even with American support, logistics support, which is totally impractical, I can assure you, as a logistics officer of yesteryear, can't be done. So it won't be long before the whole damn sad thing is over, and over 1 million young men died to no avail, other than for the fact to supply Vanguard and BlackRock and the other big colossal empires, corporate empires in the United States and the military complex, industrial military complex. Of course, safe at home. They're all safe at home. They don't go to war. Their children don't go to war. It's all very nice if somebody else goes to war and somebody else gets killed. And it probably was ever thus. It was probably forever thus. Never mind. We are where we are. Odessa is and I said this before, Odessa is predominantly a Russian city. It is a strategic key to the whole area and the Black Sea. So I said probably, I think it was last year, that the Russians would not stop this now until they had Odessa, because Odessa is their security. Odessa is their security. In the same way that Ukraine, Western Ukraine's security is in the kind of arrangement that Austria had in 1945, 1946 of guaranteed neutrality, observable neutrality. And that would be their saviour. It's what the Russians want. It's what the Russians wanted from the very beginning. But of course, you won't know that unless you watch people like me and my channel and others like me. Probably if you get all your information from the BBC or the Daily Telegraph or all the rest of it, you'll be feeling feeling it's hogwash. It is hogwash. We have some legacy media who are still claiming that Ukraine at any minute is about to win the war. So it's all really very sad. And we've been gaslighted now, as American expression. We've been gaslighted on this war now for 3 or 4 years. And the truth is now coming up. And you can't resist the truth. When it comes to war, sooner or later, the war, it will not only be over de facto, it'll be over de jure, and we'll all have to start again somewhere else. And no doubt the American neocons in Washington will start another war somewhere else. One would imagine the Middle East, where they've got their proxy war, they've got their proxy of Israel lined up, ready to take their hits for them. Although quite sure whether the tail's not wagging the dog when it comes to the Middle East, especially if you look at Congress and the Senate and the neocons in Washington who just sit there on a daily basis waiting for their instructions from Israel. But it's a sad thing, because the peace dividend, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we should now be living in peace and trading with each other. And we're not, and it's a terribly wasted opportunity, and it's been wasted by people who are nasty, shadowy people who one day we must winkle out. We must winkle them out and put them, in my view, in prison. So we've got worse to come, I'm afraid, worse to come. And I should imagine, and I've been wrong before, I stick my neck out, I think the whole thing, the whole tutti frutti will be over by Easter. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.